let's start from the beginning. I guess you learned how to play the violin by age 5. And then by the age of 10, you were mastering like the drums, piano, bass guitar, trumpet. I mean, you name it. Given all that, were you growing up, were you some kind of like musical like savant or genius or how did all that come about?
Um, I think I turned into that savant. Um, it was really my brother and sister that were the savants. They let's go back. When I was 5, my mother, my whole family is musically inclined. My father, when he was in military, he was an Air Force pilot. He retired and just stayed on the Air Force base and fixed planes. My mother, she was in government. She worked at the VA, National Disaster Medical Systems, and everybody in my family had that type of trade that was in either government or law enforcement or something like that. But our family was musically inclined. We did it for fun. I mean, we played at the family reunions for the elders. We did a lot of things like that. But it was really mainly my brother and sister. My brother Brian, who's 10 years older than me. My sister, rest in peace, she was 12 years older than me. My mother put them in the Pittsburgh Symphony Youth Program, and um, she brought me along at age 5, just to babysit me, just because she was sitting there, minding the time while she was waiting for my brother and sister to have their rehearsals at the symphony program. And one of the teachers came to my mom and said, why don't you let Stu, you know, go and practice and learn with the older kids, because the youth program was for, teenagers that started, right? And so okay, she's like, okay, I'll let him, go with the older kids because they were saying, look, at least he can learn something, maybe he'll get attached to something, and you won't have to sit here and mind your kid while you're waiting for the older two. So they put me in the program with the older kids, and I started on the violin, and I was Suzuki trained. Um, through the first chair violinist at the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. And they noticed that I picked up on the violin pretty quickly, to the point where I was, learning theory and music and learning how to read better than I could actually read English, right? And so I started getting private lessons as well from that first chair. Besides going to the youth program, I would go to his house. My mom would take me over there, and I would have private lessons as well. Throughout the years, I mastered the violin and the viola and the cello and all the string instruments. And then they started putting other instruments into my hand, from uh, the trumpet, the trombone, all brass instruments. Um, and then I went from that to, learning chord progression, with learning how to play the piano, uh, guitar. Uh, then I got into percussions, and I started really loving percussions because my father, I didn't notice till I was an adult. He never said this to anybody, but my father, he used to be the conga player for Tito Puente. And we had this elaborate set of congas and bongos in our basement, and I used to beat them like crazy. And then my dad was like, "Don't touch my congas," and I never knew why. You know what I'm saying? I could touch anything else that there was, like, our basement. We've had so many different instruments in the basement, but he was always like, "Don't touch it." But it was I've mastered up to, 10 instruments by that time when I turned into a teenager. And then, that's when I started, getting into, really passionate about music. I started making music on myself. I would have the 4-track. Even before that, I used to have like one boom box and then another boom box, and I would just play record and then play my stuff and then record it on one boom box and then take that tape out and put it in another tape and record and just keep overdubbing until I had, different tracks. And then eventually I convinced my mom to, get me a 4-track Tascam 4-track machine. And then, I went into recording. And then when I was a teenager, I begged my mom for a Roland W30 keyboard workstation. And my mother, she basically took a loan out and she was making payments for this workstation for me to make music. And the reason why was, my mother, she was she worked at our church. She was a choir director and she put the music program together, and I would go to church with her. And obviously I was getting into like playing the piano and playing the drums with the choir and singing and doing all that stuff. And the reason she got me that keyboard was because I convinced her I'll play and make music for church. And I want to be able to make music because people at church was asking me, family members would ask me, oh, it's my wife's birthday and I want to write a personal happy birthday song for her. And then I would, record them in the back of the church in the rectory where everybody congregated after mass. And I would record them, with like personal music that I created, and they would be singing happy birthday on my 4-track. And I'd have the W30 keyboard, you know what I mean, to make the music. So that was really cool. But it was a good start for me because I had a lot of discipline at the Pittsburgh Symphony youth program, and then I had a lot of time to do music at church.
Okay. All right. Cool. Now, tell me about being, and I know I'm going to mess this name up, but tell me about being the youngest member of the Ozanam Strings Orchestra and touring with the classical rhythmic section of the Pittsburgh Symphony.
That was, I could remember it today. That was amazing. It was me. I was the youngest. I was 5. I was about 6 years old, and my brother and sister. Of course, my brother was playing the drums, and my sister was playing the saxophone. Um, we would go on tour all over the eastern side of the country to do these concerts. We'd go on a tour bus. We would stay in hotels. I remember all that. Where all of us, me and the younger kids would stay with the older kids, and we'd have a lot of fun at the hotels. But we practice and rehearse and with the symphony, and then the orchestra was a big experience because I got to meet like greats that I didn't know until older in life, like Maynard Ferguson, Chuck Mangione, famous trumpet players. Um, and it was like so I did school and I had to do a lot of homework and tutoring. I had a lot of tutoring because I was missing a lot of school and going on tour and doing these things. But it gave me even more of like a sense of like what I was passionate about, what I wanted to do later in life. So that was really cool. Being the youngest member was really cool because when we got back from doing that tour, uh, because I was the youngest member, they requested me to perform on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Oh,
And
wow.
I did, yeah, and I did a few episodes with Mr. Rogers. And of course, the Ozanam Strings brought a couple other musicians. They were older onto the show, and I was showing Mr. Rogers and the rest of them how to play the violin and doing the things that I learned over at the Ozanam Strings.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's dope. So this passion that you have, as you're getting older, where does this lead you into getting with like the Sam Sneads, and actually doing, like a hip hop productions and things of that nature?
Absolutely. I was classically trained, of course. My brother and sister, all they listened to was 70s and 60s, like old school funk music and like rock music. It was nothing like classical. And I wasn't allowed to, listen to the music that I was getting into. I was starting to like, hip hop back in the day. And I was listening to, trying to figure out where where my likes was. But because I wasn't allowed to have any that type of music of my own, and my brother and sister had all these records, and all those records were like Tower of Power, um, uh, Average White Band, just like these bands that were playing, what I mean, that they listened to. There were amazing musicians that made records. And what happened was, um, we were practicing. I created a band, and we were practicing to go and play around town and stuff like that when I was a teenager. And then um, they all came to my house. And then what happened, my father was starting to get upset because we were running their light bill. We had the phone bill was blowing up. I had so many kids, in the basement, and we were practicing, and we ate up all the food. And my parents, they couldn't handle it anymore. So my dad kicked me out. He said, "No more. You can't do these band practices in here anymore. You gotta like earn. You gotta work. Like if you're gonna be doing stuff like that." And so, I started thinking about, where can we practice? So my guitar player, Tone, was Sam Snead's brother. And Anthony Burgess, Tone, he was our guitar player. He was all into Prince and playing guitar like Prince. And he says, "Yo, I got, my cousin, my cousin and my has a nightclub in McKeesport, and maybe he let us practice upstairs in the nightclub." And my brother, he's he's into hip hop. He rap, he writes and produces and this and that. Maybe you can meet him and this and that. So I asked my parents if I could go to McKeesport, and they were like, "No," because I live in Braddock Hills, this middle class neighborhood. It was just a step above poverty, as you would say it. You know what I mean? And I lived right above Braddock and Rankin, which was like really torn up. And my dad said, you know, you can't go across those train tracks. Like I could go anywhere around Braddock Hills, Swissvale, and in these neighborhoods that I would go to school, but I wasn't allowed to go across the train tracks, and I was definitely not allowed to go across the river over to McKeesport. So I did that. I took off. I went to McKeesport. I met Sam Snead and his sister and his cousin Vaughn and his uncle Larry. And we all, you know, while I got my band to practice over at this club called the Vapors. And, we would practice while Sam Snead would, he would have all these shows at the Vapors. And he was bringing in like talent from New York and artists from rappers from the West Coast. He'd bring like Eric Sermon, K Solo, you know, eh, the Hit Squad and all them, Keith Murray. And these shows was like, wow. That's when I was like watching these shows at the Vapors, and I'm like, I want to be down with that. You know what I mean? So me and Sam, we got really close, closer than his brother, who was my guitar player. Became best friends. We found out we were born on the same day, March 1st. You know what I
Oh, wow.
mean? And it was just a lot of synergy. And Sam back in the day, he was big time. He was big time. Everybody knew Sam. And he said, "Look, why don't I know you got this band, but I want to put together a production group, and I want you to be the producer, right? And I was like, so um, that's when the SP12, I saw, K Solo and all them when they came to do shows, they had this drum machine on stage called the SP12. And so I got to like mess around with the SP12. So I went back home and convinced my mom I need an SP12. You know what I mean? And she was like, so she had to take out another loan. She got me the SP12. And then so me and Sam, we like we band together and created like this production group, right? And then we start producing artists, like our own artists in the local town of Pittsburgh, McKeesport, in that whole area. And then I would be at Sam's house, we would make beats, I'd play the keys and do all this other stuff. I start producing tracks, and then we start making an album with a group called Rougher Than Most. And there was this rapper named Black Caesar, and then there was another rapper, the Arsonist, and Joe T. And they were the three rappers we were producing. And then uh, that's when we started getting really good and asking, what was the best thing if we could perform at the Vapors and do production. So Sam would produce all that stuff, and then have us doing production and things like that at night at the Vapors, and then we would open up for like the groups that Sam would bring in.
Yeah.
That was a big experience for me because um, Sam also brought in the rival producers and rappers from around town to come and perform, and we thought it was competition. So that's when I met Mailman. Mailman came, Mailman showed up performing. And he had this song called The Malfunction, and he would dress up in a U.S. postal letter carrier gear, and he was delivering you beats and rhymes, right? As
Yeah.
and Butter from Belsuver, like all these other performers from around town would come to the Vapors, and we were always competing against them because they were on the they were from another part of town, and we were like, we ain't gonna let these guys outshine us, right? And so that's when me and Sam were, it was like we were like brothers, best friends. We went through a lot together during those times, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's when Sam told me, I was getting ready to go to college. And again, my dad was like, um, you're never gonna make it in music. You need to go and work and do something like your brother, like in law enforcement, because my brother went into becoming a Pennsylvania state trooper, eventually ended up into the FBI working over at Quantico headquarters. And my sister, she was a linguist, and she was working for the government. And my dad was pushing me. He was like, either you're going to become a pilot, you're going to, work in aviation, or you're going to go to college and you're going to do something like become a doctor or something, because the steel industry crashed in Pittsburgh. It was a lot of poverty, not many opportunities. But, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and everybody else, the Vanderbilts, was investing in rebuilding U.S. Steel and repurposing U.S. Steel, going into medicine and ambulatory care and all types of other applications, which is now called UMPC. So, I my dad put me into the Civil Air Patrol. He was trying to make me become a pilot, and I blew that off right away. I just blew it off. I didn't care. My mom would drop me off at the air base, and she's like, "You're gonna be with your dad today, and you're gonna hang around airplanes and learn about fixing planes." And when I went there, I would not even show up in the hangar. I would just sit in my dad's office and wait for him. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to do music. And and then when I was ready to go to college, I was going for biology, pre-med. And my dad was like, this is your last summer, you're gonna get ready to go to college. And then I went back to Sam and I said, Sam, I got to go to college. I said, we're not going to make it here, with this music. And my dad's already got me going to college. And then Sam was like, you know, well, I'm getting out of here. You're right. We're not going to make it here. So he took off to New York, you know what I'm saying, and disappeared for a few months. And then, that was kind of like, he took off to New York. I went to St. Vincent College and I started my first year in pre-med biology. And we kept in touch, you know what I'm saying? And every time on the weekends or so when he would come back from New York, I would come back home for the weekends on school, and then he would tell me all about his experiences in New York, and I was like, "See, we would never make it here in Pittsburgh. Look what you're doing." But Sam was like, he was really, yeah, me and Sam are the same, but he was more the outgoing guy. He was just the go-getter. And I was more the laid back guy. It was just like, I'll do it, if it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
he was more of that risk taker. I was the crazy guy. He was the risk taker. And so he he came back and told me, I'm doing stuff with the his squad. You know what I mean? I'm starting to get, make relationships with them, and we're being real cool and this and that, and they're starting to listen to some of the stuff that we did with Rougher Than Most, and um, we might have something going on. So that was my thing, during that time. I was like doing my schoolwork. I come home on the weekends and I play with my band. I'll go to church and play at the church, and then I would go to the Vapors and what I mean, get with all of my cats in McKeesport, and that was kind of right before my transition, of what was to happen next.
Yeah. So fast forwarding a little bit, Sam ends up in LA, out in Cali, doing his thing. Obviously, Butter went out there as well. And I've said the same thing to Sam and the same thing to Butter when I've spoken to them. But how did a group of Pittsburgh producers and musicians reinvent the sound of the West Coast when you guys went out there? Because it was a very decided shift in the music out there. And when you start looking at liner notes and production credits and things like that, you see Sam Snead, you see Butter, you see Stu-B-Doo. Like, you're starting to see these guys, and you realize that they're coming out of Pittsburgh. So how does that happen?
Well, you know, during the time that Sam took off, Sam was like, I'm gonna be carrying the crates and luggage for the homies at the Hit Squad. And then he ended up in California. He went to the Bay Area, and there was a show that they all were doing, and with Too Short, all these other OGs on the West Coast, and then Dre was performing, and nobody knew who Snoop was. He was just bringing Snoop around and this and that. And then what happened was Sam called me. He says, I met Dre. You know what I mean? I'm gonna go to LA. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm going to LA and get with Dre. So he got with Dre right when Death Row was on top of the world. He finished, that was like right after he finished the Chronic. He was getting ready to work on some, new material, this and that. And, Sam was like, yo, you need to come out here. I told Dre all about you. And I was like, I can't, I'm in college. And he was like, you need to come out here. Like, Dre want to see you. You know what I'm saying? But you gotta just come. So he put me on the phone with Dre. Dre was like, you know, Sam, tell me you like one of the best musicians on the planet representing Pittsburgh. If you are who you say you are, you know, come out here, you know. And I told him, all right, you know what I'm saying, I'm gonna do it. And so I went back home. I went and told my mom and my dad. I told my mom first. I said, Mom, I'm gonna go to LA and I'm gonna go work with Dr. Dre. And she was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Wow. You know what I'm saying? So she went to
Yeah.
church. She went and told everybody that, oh, my son, he's in pre-med, he's working, doing biology at school. And some doctor, Dr. Dre, asked him to come to LA to work with him. You know, I'm so proud of him. And so the people at church was like, oh, do you know who Dr. Dre is? And my mom was like, no. So they told her who Dr. Dre was. And then she came back and waited for me to come home. And she was like, you know, she told my dad. So her and my dad were waiting for me to come home from college. And then they were both standing out in the front yard. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. This don't look right. And so my mom says, you're not going to LA. You're not going to be working with this Dr. Dre. I hear he's a gangster. I hear he's a rapper. I hear like all this stuff, da da da, this and that. You're not doing it. And then I told my parents, you know, I'm going. And my dad said, well, if you're going to go, you're cut off. You know what I'm saying? Like we can't support
Oh,
you on
wow.
that because we we did everything to get you into college. You know what I'm saying? And you know, they want me to do what they wanted me to do. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And even though they put me through music, music was again, like I said, we all were musically inclined, but it was for us to not to for us to learn more discipline in life with music education, and it helped with school and math and stuff like that. But you know, I took it very, very serious. Besides my brother and sister, you know, very serious. And you know, I hadn't. I was determined. After I heard Dre tell me to come out there, I was going. So I told my mom, I'm gone. I'm out. So I packed up everything and drove across country and met, you know, Dre and all them, put me up in a corporate living over at Toluca Lake, the Oakwood Apartments. And then, you know, um, that's what happened. It was just like, you know, it was me. Sam was already there. By that time, Dre and Sam were like best of friends and all that. Really
Yeah.
cool, right?
Yeah.
And Dre was single at the time and he was just open. What to answer your question about how did all of us cats get out there and you know formulate the sound was, you know, we Dre and Sam and I used to go to Jimmy Iovine's house. We would go to Gladstone's in Malibu, have dinner on Saturday night, and then we end up at Jimmy Iovine's house to hang out and watch movies because Jimmy had this movie theater. We would watch the newest movies that didn't come out yet. You know what I'm saying? It was just like,
Yeah.
wow, you know what I mean? MTV people were hanging out there. And Dre and Jimmy Iovine and myself were in a garage in Jimmy's garage, the weight by the weights. And Jimmy said, Dre, gangster music is dead. Like literally. Like he said, I love all the music that we done. You know what I mean? Interscope is doing well, this and that, but you're only being played in this region, in this territory. We need you to reinvent yourself, Dre. You know what I mean? Like Madonna, like all the other artists that had to like pivot, make, you know, grow, evolve. And he explained it. He said like this. He said, Stu-B-Doo. He says, how do you know Dre? I'm like, it's Dre. I know Dre. You know what I mean? He's like, no, no, no. He said, how how did you first know of Dre? And I said, oh, he's one of the dopest producers that I've ever known in Pittsburgh. And he was one of our targets. And he was like, did they play Dre on the radio out there in Pittsburgh? And I was like, nope. He was like, what did they play? And I was like, all the stuff from the East Coast. You know what I'm saying? Like all the East Coast hip hop stuff was being played in our region, not too much West Coast music at all. And I never heard Dre on the radio. And then Jimmy Iovine was like, "That's correct." He said, he said, two reasons, Dre, is because A, your music is very underground. It wasn't really played on the radio. I mean, because all the things that you were talking about, you guys were talking about. And it wasn't, and during that time, this is when parental advisory was being put on records because of what Dre and all them were saying. You know what I'm saying? Him
Mm-hmm.
and Easy and all them were kicking up a lot of dust with the F the police and all the other stuff that was happening before me, right? And so he explained that you need to reinvent this to yourself. And so that's when Dre was like, thinking about how can he change the music. So we start going back to Can-Am Studios and working on stuff. And then that's when Sam, he got put on at Death Row. He was an artist slash producer. He got signed. He was the first that got signed, right? And then Sam started bringing out like the rest of the crew. So, you know, we got Butter out. That Butter came out after me. Um, we brought a bunch of other cats from New York and Cleveland, like Jay Flex, um, Stocks McGuire. He was called Drama. So we had a bunch of writers and other producers that, from Pittsburgh and from the other parts like Ohio and New York. And we created this group called Street Scholars. You know what I'm saying? And this was the thing that Sam wanted to produce. He wanted all of us to produce that sound for Sam, right? And what happened was we started recording these songs, and then this is when uh, we would go back to Jimmy's. We would go have dinner at Glasstones, end up at Jimmy's, and Jimmy be like, "What you got?" And then Dre would play all this stuff from the other homeboys, like from the Dog Pound. You know what I mean? Some of the producers like LT Hutton and Barney Rubble and all the other guys that was doing music that came from the West Coast. And then Jimmy Iovine was like, "Nope, nope, next, no, next." And then Dre turned and started playing Sam Snead and my music and Butter music. And then he was like, Jimmy Iovine was like, "Stop that. What's that? What's that? I want to hear more of that. I want to hear more of that. That's where you should go." You know what I mean? And then that's when Dre was like, you know, kind of like all hands on deck for Sam Snead and his producers. You know what I'm saying? So that's when Dre started like having me come to his house and record at his house. And aside from everybody that was at Can-Am Studios or at Ocean Way or all the other studios, I was recording at his house. Me and Sam would go and record too. And then we eventually Butter was making beats and stuff and getting things going on. And it was the music that I was making had my orchestral type of influence to it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And Pittsburgh had not only like Pittsburgh's a huge arts town, as you know. Like we had George Benson, you know what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other, jazz people and there wasn't hip hop wasn't a thing in Pittsburgh, but there was a lot of jazz, and then we had a lot of people from Cleveland coming to Pittsburgh, like Levert, the OJs, uh, Roger Troutman and Zapp. Like, my cousins live right down the street from the Troutman. So it was a lot of that influence from Pittsburgh that we kind of like start putting in our music, pulling up all the Zapp stuff and when I
Mm-hmm.
was pulling up Roger's stuff, it wasn't just because Zapp was dope. It was because he lived down the street from our house, and we used to be in Zapp's basement listening to them play when we were kids. So it was like a lot of that influence plus my orchestral influence was being put in samples and we would make these beats. And then that's when, these songs were starting to, I say, manifest,
Hmm.
because Dre would, you always knew when Dre was going to start working on something next or get ready to put something out next, was because he would play those tracks in his truck, and he would show up at the studio banging the music. And when you heard that music, all of us producers and all of us artists like Corrupt and Daz, and you know what I mean, everybody, DJ Quick, everybody that was there, um, we would hear Dre pull up, and if he was playing that song, we would look at each other and be like, "Oh, that's Stu-B-Doo's track. Hey, Stu, you about to get put on, man." You know what I'm saying? Like they
Yeah.
knew, because I guess that's how it happened to Quick, or they know how that happened with the guys before me. You know what I'm saying? Like Barney Rubble with, and all these guys that was doing gin and juice and stuff like that. So that's how, like, Sam was like putting all of us together. We had this Street Scholar sound that we were working, and it was supposed to be for Sam Snead's album. And then, a lot of these things, like Dre was so close with Sam, he was just leaning on us through Sam. He was leaning on us to produce a lot of stuff. And it just seemed that Dre was spending a lot of time in our sessions, right? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And nobody else knew why, except Jimmy Iovine. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So, because Drake kept that kind of hush about reinventing his sound and stuff like that.
Now those tracks that you were playing for Jimmy Iovine, were what do you remember what tracks those were? Like were those tracks that eventually ended up, becoming songs that got released, or what was that early stuff that Jimmy was so adamant that that was the sound that needed to come out next?
I think that it wasn't stuff that we like mainly produce. It was just a lot of stuff that we put together. Like,
Okay.
so Dre would have like a foundation of a beat, or Sam would have a foundation of a beat. And then we would just go over the tracks with our instrumentation and stuff like that. And these were all like demos, you know what I mean? Of just being really, creative, just doing stuff that we felt like doing. And this was the stuff that we made was kind of like off the time from when we were, in the studios doing stuff for other people, like the Dog Pound or all the other people. They wanted that G Funk, you know what I mean? They wanted that stuff, but with our touch to it, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of how, the Dog Pound was working on stuff at the same time as we were working on the Street Scholar stuff. And so, we spent a lot of time, like, Ricardo Corrupt was like my homeboy, and he's from Philly, and you know what I'm saying, and we had a lot of synergy, and Daz was really cool, and everybody was like family. So we, this was during the time where Death Row was on top of the world. We about to, Snoop was killing it. He came out with Doggy Style, and everybody was just celebrating the release of Snoop's record. And so there was like, okay, all that G Funk stuff was still continuing through Snoop and his crew. And then the Street Scholars was kind of doing like a mixture of East Coast hip hop samples, and you know what I mean, but instruments being played over it from what we were doing. And then me adding that orchestral sound to it, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that's what Jimmy started turning to, because these were like demos, and these weren't like the ones that Dre would go to first. Dre was
Hmm.
like, Dre would go to like his hit makers first. They were the people that made hits for him already. So it was like Barney Rubble and all the stuff they did, and you know what I mean, and Dog Pound and all them. They were getting their listen for Jimmy Iovine, but it was that the songs that we were doing for Sam and the songs that we were doing for Dre, because Dre was like, I'm gonna do my own album. And then he was talking about he wants to do a collaboration with Cube when he gets back from New York, because Cube took off and got with the Shockley brothers, and took the lynch mob with him. And you know what I mean? It was just like all this stuff going on. And those were the sounds that we were just making tracks. And you know, me, Dre, Sam, Bud, all of us, we would start making all types of other stuff and just, you know, having fun with it. And then when we end up at Jimmy's, Jimmy would just be like, I like that, you know, and because he kept saying I like that, and this is like commercial, and you know, the lyrics, the choice of words that we were using wasn't like it had that gangster umph to it, but we were like being more like methodical and about what we were saying. And we were talking about the current times, and we were being more relative towards things that not only happen on the West Coast, but also on the East Coast, because we were just kind of talking about everything that we experienced, you know, all together, which was short of what my homeboys, my brothers on the West Coast was doing. All they knew was, you know, what they experienced in their own neighborhoods and all the things that they were doing. They were putting it through their music, and it was dope. But you know, Dre was just, you know, he was trying to figure out how to do his own thing. That was kind of like how the sound started developing into, you know, the sound that was moving forward into our commercialization. And that's how I say like the Pittsburgh sound was deeply embedded in it, because by the time it was all said and done, all the hit songs that was being produced by all of us. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And and that's when, you know, it was painfully obvious. When I say painfully obvious, it was obvious not only to ourselves but our peers and everybody else that Dre got his crew. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? And his crew wasn't Snoop and the Dog Pound and you know, Snoop had his crew, and Quick had his thing, and you know, everybody had their groups and the people they would go to. And even though we were all family and everything was doing that, it just seemed that we were just dedicated to doing stuff for Dre, you know what I'm saying, at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah. Okay. So, doing stuff like the Murder Was the Case remix, Natural Born Killaz, Keep Their Heads Ringing, and California Love. Like those were decidedly different sounds than what we had heard previously out of Dre and Death Row, right?
Yeah,
Because you had the
yeah,
Chronic and you had Doggy Style, but
yeah,
then all of a sudden here comes the remix to Murder Was the Case and all that. Tell me
yeah.
about working on those particular tracks and how those songs came about.
um you know, the Street Scholars, you know, we always thought that we when we created music, we created movies in our songs. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything that we produced had the sound effects, had the storylines, all the things that we were doing. It was always based off of like how would this be portrayed watching it in a theater? You know what I'm saying? We were highly animated like that. And you know, uh for instance, like Natural Born Killaz, Dre, you know, I mean, Dre was getting all the plugs. Like, you know, Oliver Stone was doing this movie called Natural Born Killers with, you know, and he came back and he would tell us these concepts, you know what I'm saying? And he'd be like, I'm working with Cube. Cube is back, you know what I'm saying? And I'm going to be working with Cube, and we're going to be making some heat. And then Natural Born Killers was kind of like a movie. We kind of knew what the movie was about, but but again, our group was always writing about the current times. That so the songs, the production, OJ, all that stuff that happened with OJ and Nicole, rest in peace,
Yeah.
and you know what I'm saying, all that stuff with um in Brentwood, you know, on Bundy when she got murdered, and you know, there was a lot of things that was happening. Um, uh, that you know, Menendez brothers, and you know, them killing their parents, and just like a lot of things that was on TV that was like high profile, very high profile. And so we would kind of like visualize in our making Natural Born Killers is like what was in the thought process of a killer, you know what I'm saying? And so like I would sample the blood, like drops of water. And
Mhm.
that drops of water was supposed to be the sound of blood dripping, but that drop of water would happen on the beat. Beat, every downbeat, you would hear tweet, tweet. So it was like all the stuff
Yeah.
that we were doing in samples had a lot of like what I call in audio design or or doing compositions in film is Foley. You know, we would take a lot of sound effects and put them in our music. And it wasn't like sound effects that people would think. So car crashes, screeches, um, me taking a screwdriver and running it across the piano, an open piano case, and you hear this screeching sound, like all that stuff. We put it in our music, and then we lay some dope bass lines, you know what I mean, and keys and bass, and then Dre would have us experiment on things. So I was always doing all these lead, synth things that Dre was known for having in the G-Funk stuff, but we needed to go beyond that. So I would put like distortion guitar on the lead synth and make it sound crazy, like you felt like, you know, something crazy was happening in your mind and you couldn't get it out of your head. And all this stuff came together like a symphony, and that's was like Natural Born Killers. Murder Was the Case, the remix was the same thing. It was like I took a lot of crazy sounds, samples, and we put it together in the beat. And then I went up to Dre's house, and Dre was like, "This is crazy. This is crazy." And this is again, they were working on Snoop's uh soundtrack. Like he was like we gotta do a follow-up to Doggy Style, but we gotta put Snoop in the movie. You know what I'm saying? So that's when he wanted to have Murder Was the Case. He wanted him to do the lyrics, but he wanted the music to just be totally different and totally, separate from what everybody was used to him, rapping over. Um, um, then, California Love, it was kind of like Sam was making this beat. I came in and started doing like the keys. I sampled Joe Cocker's Woman to Woman. Again, that's the things that my brother and sister used to listen to. Um, and, again, current times. Like we were going through a lot of like uh, tumultuous situations where there was all this beef that was happening with East Coast and West Coast, and there's just territorial music. uh Biggie was starting to get a little bit more gangster with his lyrics and talking about the East, New York is the best and this and that. And there was a lot of rivalries that was being created. So again, because of the current times and what was going on, um, you know, Jimmy and Dre was like, we need to unify everybody because everybody here is off, kind of doing their own thing. We need to unify the West Coast. So, I went and met with Stevie Wonder, and I told Stevie Wonder, um, he was like, "What you doing?" And I'm like, "I got a dilemma. I got to make this song to unify uh, the West Coast." And he was like, "Well, he says, you need to make a song that's timeless." And I was like, "What?" He said, "You got to make something like an anthem, something that everybody sings all the time over and over." And then he says, like Happy Birthday. Everybody sings Happy Birthday on the birthday. And
Yeah.
I was like, this guy, first of all, I'm just in amazement that I'm around Stevie Wonder, but I was really like confused by the things he was telling me because I was like, how do I make a happy birthday song? And I'm making, what I'm saying? I don't get that. So when I got back with the crew and with Dre and everybody, um, that's when it clicked because we were talking about all the beef that was going on and everybody's territorial and unify the West Coast. So that's when I looked and Dre was like, he was listening to pop locking, California knows how to party,
Yeah.
and then Dre was like, hey, wait a minute, let's do California, and then with the beat that you made, you know what I mean, that has this West Coast vibe to it, like it felt like the posse was riding in, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the Cowboys was riding in, and then we mixed all that together, and lo and behold, California Love came. But see, that was supposed to be a Sam Snead song. Sam Snead, that was his song. He was supposed to be like for the Street Scholars, his own solo album, and this was kind of after Recognize and all that stuff like that. So Sam recorded it. Jay Flex got on it and did his lyrics. And then once Dre heard it, Dre was like, I want that for me, for my record. And so he plucked it from us and said, I want to do that. And we're like, that's dope. Dre wants it for his thing. That's even, Sam, sorry, but
Yeah.
it's Dre, you know what I'm saying? Dre wants it. So Dre took it, and he went on and did his thing, and then I we kept, Dre kept working on it and mixing it and doing all these tweaking it and this and that, and then we got Roger Trotman to come out, and Roger's the homie, like I said, I've known him for years, and he came out, he blessed us with the vocoder, the tube box, you know what I mean, and then uh that's when Suge heard it, and Suge heard the song, and Suge asked Dre, like, what's that? And Dre was like, this is my song, like my new song. And then Suge says, nah, this is for Tupac, because that's when we just got Tupac out. We
Mm-hmm.
just signed him, and it was kind of like all hands on deck for Tupac. You know what I mean? And so if it went from being a Sam Snead and Jay Flex song to becoming a Dre song, then turned into being a Dre and Tupac song, and by way of Suge, coming in and just assigning it that way.
Right.
So it was dope though. You know what I mean? Like Tupac came in and woo, it's the first time I ever saw somebody come in, write something, lay it down, and not have to recut it again, and then go into another session and then lay something else down. You know what I'm saying? Who's the
Yeah.
hardest worker? And uh, that was kind of like how the songs were evolved, because we were kind of like writing things about the current times, things that were happening to us personally, without going deep into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, making some, putting that Pittsburgh sound and, the influences that we had in Pittsburgh together, and with Roger Troutman and all that. And then Dre,
Right.
coming up with the anthem, title, California. So it was that's when I told Stevie Wonder, thank you. I think we have that anthem, you
Right.
know.
Right. Yeah. So something I've always wondered is with California Love having Roger on there, and then the Blunt Time song with RBX
Ooh.
at Aftermath
Yes.
also having Roger on there. Were those done like around the same time with Roger
Yes.
in the studio, or
Yes, it was.
okay?
So, during that time, we had access to Roger, you know, especially me, um, had access to Roger at, all the time during that time he was there. We spent days living in the studio, recording all types of stuff. And if he wasn't recording with me, he was recording with Dre. He was recording, he'd do a couple things with Snoop, by way of Dre, you know what I'm saying? But Dre was
Yeah.
in control of, like, having all those things happen with Dre, um, you know, uh having those things go with Roger Troutman. And we've had a good, 6 months with Roger Troutman. So that's why Blunt Time became something, really big, for me, because, producing RBX or all the other guys that was, part of our situation. We kind of like leaned on Roger, you know what I'm saying, to get
Mm-hmm.
that talk box sound and get the hooks and things like that. And then whenever he recorded way more than what we uh expected. And so when Roger went back to his own Roger life, we had so much recordings that we could just go into the vault and pull up some recordings of Roger and then make music around it. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So we had a lot of ideas that Roger laid, from our older tracks that we could actually revamp and do that. You're
Okay.
absolutely right.
Okay. Cool. That's dope. That's dope. So shortly after the California Love, All Eyes on Me album comes out, or at least during that time that it was being released, this is when
Mhm.
Dre transitions from Death Row to going to start Aftermath.
Right.
And with that, he forms this new production unit, the Soul Kitchen, with you, Krista Glove, um, and
Floss
Butter.
P,
Yep,
Butter,
Flossy P. Yep.
yep,
Um,
and Dre, yep.
yeah. So, what was that like in the beginning of Aftermath? Like trying to identify the sound that was going to be the Aftermath sound.
Um, we didn't know what the Aftermath sound was, until we realized that working together as a group, as a production group, created that Aftermath sound. So, Dre always taught us that, check your ego at the door. We're in the studio, and if it's to help, you know, uh, if it's to help whatever said artist that we're working on, we would just focus on doing our best to bring our best for that artist. Or
Mm-hmm.
so that was kind of like the aftermath temperature that was going on in the studio. And see, we started all as individual producers for Aftermath. So we had different time slots. I come in the morning early at Record One, um, and record for until night. And then Floss P would come in the afternoon, work until way late in the morning, early. Um, Butter Butter would come in the evening, and he'd work all night until the morning. Um, Krista Glove, he worked during the daytime. We all had these different slots where we would just keep the studio going 24/7, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we all were individually producing our own stuff for Aftermath, right? Um, it was that point where our sessions would bleed over into other people's time slots. And so, you know, I would show up, and Butter would have something on the track, you know what I mean? And then I'd get on Butter's track and start laying down keys and bass lines, and I would be playing on Butter's track. And then Krista Glove would be doing drums on Butter, and Flossie P would have a track, and we'd jump on Flossie P's track. And then it got to a point where we all were started not only producing our own stuff, but we started producing together as a group, you know? And Dre liked that. Dre was like, these guys are working together. Not only like we had our own little studios at home, at our own, private situations, but when we went into the studio, all of us worked together. And that was kind of like, it felt like Motown. All the things that I learned about Motown is like we all were, you know, played our part for, so if it was produced by Butter, it was produced by Butter, but all of us touched that production in some form or
Mm-hmm.
manner. Same with me, same with Dre, same with Floss, same with Chris. And that's when we started realizing we're a group, we're a production group. And then that's when, Dre called us the Soul Kitchen. He kept telling everybody, we're cooking up stuff, in the soul. We got this group called the Soul Kitchen. And then he was telling, media and talking to other people about this production group called the Soul Kitchen. And we were just going along with it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's dope. You know what I mean? Like he actually labeled us as a production crew. And that's how it happened. Like the Soul Kitchen, we just started doing things, together and start making things. And it didn't matter if it was R&B, because we had, Aftermath started with a wide range of different types of artists and different genres. We were testing a lot of things out. Even Dawn from In Vogue and Eve, and what I'm saying, just everybody that came through, Mary J, you name it. Anybody that came through, Scarface, this and that, the Soul Kitchen got together and just like crowded around that and started making music for it. So we just started producing stuff for not only for ourselves, but for other people outside of our label. And that's how we kind of like monikered that or coined that name, the Soul Kitchen. Because when we work together, you get that I would say the Aftermath foundations, of a sound. Right.
Okay. So earlier we were talking about your orchestral kind of contributions to a lot of these tracks, and a lot of that came to fruition through this Aftermath stuff with the Been There Done That song, and then Rasassination with Ras Kass.
Rasassination. Yep.
Yeah, East Coast, West Coast Killers, like all that stuff. So
yeah.
talk to me about making those tracks, and because the Been There Done That, the original song was dope, but then in the video at the end, there was like this whole like opera symphonic type of thing that then translates to the Ras Kass song. So tell me about
Ghetto
intertwining
Fabulous.
those things and building those songs.
So again, I'm sitting in on Been There Done That. We all had a song for Aftermath album, and I'm sitting in Butter's session, and Butter's like, Stu-B-Doo, like, get on it. You know what I mean? So obviously I'm getting on Been There Done That, and then it was real late. We recorded Been There Done That, and then Dre, he did his verses, and it was like 2-3 a.m. in the morning. I went back to my house, and then I was I couldn't sleep because I was just so wired from recording all day and all night that I couldn't go to sleep. And I had that Been There Done That in my head. And then Dre had me programmed by that time to do remixes, because that was Murdered It Was the Case remix, you know what I'm saying? So I was kind of always going to the next, like California Love remix. You know what I'm saying? Like all these things, we were just making tracks and being like, hey, how would that work on Been There Done That? So what happened was, I got home, I didn't go to sleep. I had my MPC on. I went, instead of going to bed and getting rest, I went straight into my second bedroom, which was a studio, and I started, pulling up listening to orchestra music. Again, I was listening to, Mozart and Vivaldi and Chopin, and just the things that I grew up listening to. And then this one sample came up, and I'm like, it was like a dramatic part. And it was all soft music, laid back orchestral music. And then this transition was, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. So, I sampled it and then started replaying it. And then I showed up at the studio that same morning around 10 a.m., all wired, tired, didn't get no sleep, but I produced the drums, the sample, and just some of the music, like the keys to it. And then I went and presented it to everybody. They were all eating at Stanley's next door from the studio, and they came back and everybody's just chilling. And then I went and played that, dropped that song, that beat on them, and then everybody just went crazy, like nuts. Like people were just running out the studio and like, oh my God, what did you do, Stu-B-Doo? Like, what the heck? Where did this come from? Where did you, And I was like, I don't know. I was wired and I just did it, And Dre was like, you need to stay up all night every night and like keep making that, right? And so and the thing was, Dre, it was around that time when Dre was getting ready to do a music video and stuff like that. And then he told me, I'm gonna take that track you did and I'm gonna put it in the video. And it's gonna be a transition into the video. Because again, here we are, we're making movies. You know what I'm saying? So everything tracks that we make, we're kind of thinking, how would it play out? And Dre was very animated as well. He was very storyboardish about the videos. And then he put that track in at the end of the song. And then I was wondering, why this dude taking tango lessons? You know what I'm saying? He'd be like, I gotta
Yeah.
go. I'm about to go, go do my tango. And I'm like, what? You know, we see it in the video. You know what I mean? This dude is,
Yeah.
and then, like my homeboy, like OG Ice-T and what I mean, all these other guys, they heard that track. And um this is when the time when when we were over at Aftermath, Dre was kind of looking for another Snoop, you know what I'm saying, another Road Dogg, you know what I'm saying. And this was kind of like uh right around the days when Marshall was coming along, you know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And it was kind of like Dre was put out an APB, for everybody industry, that he's looking for a hot artist, rapper that can like be his road dog, right? And so, Golden State Warriors came, Ras Kass, Saphir, you know what I'm saying? Exhibit, you name it, all these dudes were coming through the studio to, you know, see if they can get that title, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And um here comes that track again, you know what I'm saying? So I demoed Ras Kass because I thought lyrically Raz was like untouchable at that time. Like he was just writing rhymes and he was battling people in like right on the spot. Like he wouldn't hesitate and come off the top of the head. And he was very savvy. So, I put Raz on that track and I demoed him to present him to Dre. You know what I'm saying? To
Mm-hmm.
to see if Sam would see if Raz would be that guy that would be rapping with Dre. And Dre was like, the track is so dope, you know what I'm saying? And he's like, and Ras Kass sounds like amazing on it, And then so Raz, he got really bold. And once he heard Dre say that, he took off, went back to Priority Records, Brian Turner and all his guys over there, and told them, played them the track with him rapping on it. And then they were like, wow, you know what I'm saying? So that, you know, um, the Rasassination was, an interpretation of Shaft in Africa, so we was always, Sam Snead was always, you know, having us watch these movies, Shaft and all this other stuff, and we get ideas from these movies. And then I would take those movies and go through the soundtracks the music that was in the movie, and I would say I'll get inspiration from it, from
Mm-hmm.
Shaft. So I everybody was saying Shaft is dope. He was like, this guy, you know what I mean? He was the guy. And so I took that sample from there Shaft in Africa, and then I played over it. And again, by that time, me and Ras Kass were like, me, Raz, Exhibit, and Saphir were extremely close, like best friends. And they were my go-to when I would produce stuff. I would get Raz or Exhibit or some of them to like demo the track just so I can see if it was dope enough. Because if I
Mm-hmm.
thought that, because I was like, if my track could withstand a battle rapper like Raz, or withstand the gruffness of an Exhibit, or the finesse of Saphir, or this and that, I could go to Dre and be like, check this out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, and Dre would greenlight all this stuff with them on it. You know what I'm saying? And that was like what happened with Ras Kass, and I got to actually work on his album. And then, again, West Side Connection and all these guys, like I was, getting with Cube and Dub C, Mac 10 and all these guys. They're like, we were really close. So they all were starting to work on their own individual albums, and that's when I started getting with that stuff. So that was kind
Okay.
of how where it all came about.
Okay. Dope. Cool. Now, um, you mentioned Eminem. So were you there when Eminem uh, kind of first came on board, and did you do any work on any of the Eminem stuff?
So forgot about Dre. Um, I was doing this again the it's like string section. I was doing this sample, and I was like playing the this chord progression with the strings. And Jimmy was he brought Marshall to the table with us, and he told us, you got to keep this kid secret. We can't let anybody know that he's gonna do that Dre's gonna do a record with him. You know what I'm saying? And it was, so Marshall would, be in the studio sessions with us early on those days. And it wasn't for Marshall, it was like because we were working with Dre and on stuff for him. And that
Mm-hmm.
was when Dre was starting to work on his album, The Chronic 2. And but it wasn't it wasn't titled The Chronic 2 at that time. It was just us making beats. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was um, they started producing the beat, you know what I mean, and start putting, this kind of different style of beat that was happening. It had this like, you know, I would call it acrobatic or athletic type style of rapping to it, where these rappers were rapping fast, like Twista, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and and uh Dre was like, this is sick. So, I laid the chord progression down with the strings over that beat. And then I went on to start doing like other production and stuff like that. And then Mailman called me uh, because that was around the time we brought Mailman in, and he was heavy, as far as getting involved with the production and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mailman hit me up and he said, yo, you remember that beat we did way back, way back? And I was like, yeah. He was like, you got to hear it. And he played it over the phone, and it was Forgot About Dre. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, that is sick. And he was like, yeah. He was like, yeah, but that white boy, yeah, that young dude, um, Marshall is gonna be, getting on it. And I was like, that is sick. You know what I mean? Like that it was crazy just to hear how it became Forgot About Dre, because again, Dre was working on his record.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Jimmy was telling him he needs to work on his records, and because he was known for having a lot of features on his records. He didn't have like no solo record where it was just him going throughout the whole song. He would have all these
Yeah.
features. And so that's what happened. He got M on it. M killed it. He killed it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. To this day. So between between Death Row, Aftermath, and all that, are there any songs that we would be surprised that you had production work on those songs, whether it be Eminem or 50 Cent or Game or anybody like that, or something back on Death Row?
I mean, every time you hear like those strings, chords, like Game, How We Do. This is how we
Mm,
do. You know, all those elements were coming from me. Um, uh, uh, in the club, that that whole thing where it was getting the stuff with like Scott Storch and all these guys, what I call the second wave of producers that came after the founding producers.
yeah.
All those things, Dre was like taking things from the vault that we've done back in the day, right? And then just saying, look, check this out. And then these guys would like make them hits. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Straight like get on them and produce them full on because these were like ideas and templates and samples and just chord progressions and things that we would do back in the day that we would just do a song or do a track or do a piece of something and then move to the next, do something, move to the next, and it all would end up in Dre's hands, and he would have it in this thing called a vault, like
hmm
where all the music was being stored. So Dre had through us, he was fortunate to get a collection of a lot of stuff that ended up on a lot of other guys' albums. Um, Trying to think of some of the other stuff that had my either my chord progressions or my samples that were in it. Um, it was just so long ago. That's when I would start getting into, producing R&B and, getting into
Yeah,
theme
yeah.
park production and stuff like that. But yeah, um,
Okay. Now that's dope because that's stuff that I would have never known. In the club basically started out as a foundation, or you were the foundation of that track, or how we do.
yeah,
Because I've noticed that Dre, his sound has gotten more of that like orchestral, symphonic, type opera, you know, inspirations, in it over the years. And it's a dope
yeah,
sound. And so it's
yeah,
just cool to see, where that sound kind of originated from or got, inspired out of. So, with you
absolutely.
guys,
I'm
that's dope.
You're right. I mean, we've inspired each other so much. Dre, you know, uh, we still text and talk, every other day. I get texts from him every other day. He's talking about these ideas. I'm about to produce Bruce Springsteen, you know, and he sent me an idea, and send me something like this or this and that. He would send me like Little Richard or Chuck Berry and just some of the stuff, and that's really cool about Dre, is that no matter all the way up to these days, we still inspire each other big time.
Mhm.
Like, um, because we all now older, we got kids, we got family. His kids are adults. I'm kind of younger, so I got high schoolers and grade schoolers. And regardless of us talking about life and things like that, we're always like texting about, you know, what's going on in the music industry and what's missing or what's needed, or what I mean, or what he's doing, or stuff like that. What I mean? So it's just kind of crazy that I get all these things and still have uh that inspiration, what I mean, to just do these type
Mm.
of things, what I mean, to
Oh, that's
keep
dope.
going on, what I mean, and
Yeah.
you know, just get that idea where we just keep in touch and inspire each other. You know what I'm saying? So that's that's the thing I love, because he's always been like a true friend, a brother. He he's always looked out for us. We've been there for him from day one and stuck it
Yeah.
out through the not only the high times but all the bad times. You know what I mean? That
Right.
happened. And I feel like, humbled and proud to say that, I have that same relationship with him where, you know, we just care about, the important things in life, like each other and our families, and what we can do to contribute and help each other out. So
Yeah.
that's a really cool thing, that we inspire each other. So it feels good to know that, he's, that I was a big influence to him,
Yeah.
and vice versa. You know what I mean? Obviously, he's inspired the whole world. It really feels good to know that, I've inspired him in a way.
Sure.
So that's a
Yeah,
really
that's
good
dope.
brother.
Yeah, dope. So I wanted to end this on the private jet flying that you're doing. I think that's
Yes.
dope. And you because originally I wasn't sure how you got into that, but talking to you earlier and you saying your dad wanted you to kind of get into aviation and do that kind of thing. So um but how did you end up getting into that now that this is what you're doing with the private jets?
Yeah, I started, I got older. Um, Besides having friends in the entertainment industry, I had a lot of friends that had nothing to do with the entertainment industry. And, one of my close friends, he was big in cars, and I'm big in cars too. I love cars. And so we both like partnered up in uh, a car wash in Valencia, and we invested in it and turned it into a really nice high-end car wash. People start showing up with exotic cars and their boats in Valencia to be cleaned. And then we eventually uh, got an office in Van Nuys, and and created an exotic car business, where we would, get cars on consignment from Lamborghini, Beverly Hills, Ferrari, Paul Rusnak of Rolls-Royce Rusnak. And, that's when I went and got my dealer's license. I actually, I love cars. So just like I love music, I wanted to know the business of cars. And so I got myself entrenched in it. So I would, besides producing at night, with the likes of like Neo and all these other people, I was, doing exotic cars, and we were selling these cars to all of my friends. Like I sold, Bentley to Ray J. It was his first Bentley. Kim Kardashian's first Bentley, and all the athletes. We started having a really cool business, and then we purchased an exotic car dealership in Studio City. It was called Luxury Ride. We had like it was an old Volvo dealership that we turned into an exotic car dealership, and then what we did was we had like $3 million worth of cars in our showroom, from exotics, prestigious cars, and classic cars, right? But we had 100,000 square foot facility, and we had a customization where the old Volvo did services in the back. We turned that into like custom mod. So we took some of these exotic cars and we did deals with rim companies like HRE, Asante, like, all the different brands. We started doing car shows, and we do customization of cars. So when people, the cars that we sold them to, we say, hey, we could put rims, or we could do stitching on your seats. We could do all types of mods on your cars. And that was kind of like the birth of Platinum Motorsports in Los Angeles, with my Armenian friends. And so we were doing exotic car rentals to the Picture Studios, because our exotic car dealership was right across the street from CBS Radford. So they would rent our cars for like television
Mm.
shows. Um, we started doing stuff for Universal Studios. And then that's when we were renting cars, that's when I got the idea of taking our cars out to to the private airports like Van Nuys Airport, LAX, because I saw that, the people that were flying private jets were buying exotic cars too. So it was the same clientele. So I went to a couple flight-based operations at Van Nuys Airport. I went to this one place called Elite Aviation, and I met the owner, Robbie Lau, and his dad, Robbie Sr. And we did this like rental car flight packages where a client would, fly in on a private jet, land, and then we'd have like a Rolls Royce or Ferrari or something waiting for them so they could take for the week. Then they come back and drop it off at the airport, get back on their private jet and go back to where they belong, right? And so every time that I show up at the private airport, I started getting these weird feelings that like the passion was starting to itch me. And I'm sitting there staring at a private jet on the tarmac. And then Robbie comes outside and he was like, "Hey, Stu, like, what's up?" I was like, "Not much." He was like, "We're doing so good with these flight car packages, like, is there anything else we could do?" And he's like, "Anything you like to do?" Like, he was so excited. And he was telling me, you know, besides running the company for his dad, and he was like the president, his dad was the CEO, chairman. Robbie told me, he said he was going to go and go back to flight school and get his rotorcraft license to fly helicopters because that's what he was learning for a while. And then his dad had him come into the business and he didn't get to like train anymore. And then he said he was going to go back to training to fly a helicopter. He was like, and I was staring at that plane, and I turned to him and said, "I want to be a pilot." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "I want to be a pilot." And he was like, "Why?" I said, um, well, I start thinking about this every time I show up at the airbase, at the fixed base operations. I started liking planes, and I wanted to know about the business. Just like I like cars, I said, I want to know the business of aviation. And somebody here told me that I should become a pilot if I want to know the business of aviation. Why? Because you get to touch all aspects of the business from uh, maintenance, MRO requirements, aircraft, engine, hull, fuel procurement. You get to know servicing, you get to know charter, you get to know uh, aircraft acquisitions, and you get to know just like the business, how the business runs. And on top of it, you're with the clients, so you get to fly around. So I he I told him I'm serious. He made a recommendation. I went to Mach 1 flight school in Van Nuys Airport, and I took my um my exotic car money and the money that I made in music, just the royalties that I saved, and started investing it into my flight school. And then I started going to flight school. I got type rated on a Pilatus PC-12 was my first aircraft after flying all these Cessnas. And then the friend that told me, to know the business of aviation, you should become a pilot. He said, one of these aircraft owners, he's letting me do charter, like with his plane. So, and it's a business. And he said, he says, "I know you're finishing flight school and you're type rated on a Pilatus, but," he said, "can you be my second in command and fly on the right side and we'll do charter?" He says, "All you got to do is shut up. When the clients are in the plane, don't, if they ask you questions, revert to me, let me answer all the questions." And he says, I'll fly because legally for commercial charter, you got to have two pilots to transport people in commercial operations. So he needed me to be his second in command. And even though I didn't know much about, the whole operation, I learned the business through doing charter. So we would go drop off the client, and then on the way back, I got to fly the plane. You know what I'm saying? And so I built a lot of hours flying charter, And then I also made money because, you know, he was getting paid for this charter, and then he would pay me as a pilot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So here I'm like, so I took that charter money and started paying for my flight school with it, you know, and that just started becoming a business for me. And I started understanding charter, the ins and outs, the the intricacies of it, the pain points, all these things about the business. And then I start getting into avionics. Later on in the years, I start understanding flight control systems, sensor arrays, and what, you know, all the inner operations of not only the aircraft, but also what charter business did. So eventually, I stopped flying because I started having kids. I wife and kids, and you know that was getting tough. So I started just staying in the offices and just booking charter for like my celeb friends. So you know, Jamie Foxx and Alex Avant would call me and be like, "We're going to Vegas. What plane should we take?" You know, and then people would just start coming to me because I came from their industry. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then I knew about what planes they should fly because a lot of these brokers would just put them in the most expensive plane and send them off. And I'm like, you don't need to be in a Gulfstream going to Vegas with just you two. That's a 14 passenger plane. All you need is like a Challenger or something smaller, and you could pay half the price. And so I started getting a lot of business, you know, through my relationships in the industry. And I
Mm-hmm.
started gaining a lot of trust in the aviation industry because I was flying with all of these guys. And so eventually, I met some guys who had nothing to do with the music industry again. They partnered up with me, and you know, I was telling them about all of the problems that were happening in charter, and it all had to do with, you know, uh, how long it would take for a customer to actually get an answer on their flights, to understand like what it would take to get a charter. They had to usually traditionally call their handler, or you know, call the fixed base operator, and then you know, it would take them time to depend on somebody to have the flight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when I started partnering up with my guys, we got investment, and then we created an app called Fly Air. It's kind of like the Uber of private jets. And
Oh,
so
okay.
what we did was we built this app. It's Fly Air. It's in the App Store, and it's also on Google Play. This basically, it's an app that allows clients to essentially book private flights on demand using artificial intelligence to curate their, not only their flight requests, but also curate the planes that are offered around the globe. And
Mm.
so basically, you know, this is what you get, is something with this app where you go, let me see flights from Los Angeles to New York for tomorrow. And what happens is it searches the flights and it gives you the answers, you know, within the flight request. So what you see is LAX to JFK and the dates for
Yep.
tomorrow. And then basically I just say search. And then what happens is it pulls up all the flights that are available to you in within seconds. So what
Oh,
happens is
wow.
here I got a Citation Sovereign, and it goes from small flight planes all the way to large
Oh, wow.
aircrafts,
That's
right?
cool.
And it has like the interior pictures and things like that. And then basically, you know, this is a $48,000 one-way trip, right? You could just say book, you know, you could push that and say, I can book the flight. And then basically you can book the flight. And what we have on this is uh, a search engine. We have profile preferences that allow you to, like what I learned from the music industry is like, oh, when you're going to perform, what do you want in your green room? I put the same stuff on this profile preferences, like what type of flight
Okay.
attendant, you know, what what high-tech gadgets are you bringing, or what type of food that you want on the flight, right? And then we also created a group flight component that allows people to essentially go get together and pay for their seat. So you see, we're promoting the Super Bowl
Yep.
in Vegas. I hit that. It gives you an explanation of the Super Bowl. It tells you,
Nice.
yeah, it tells you the flight route criteria, and then it tells you how much your seat, you could pay for your seat, right?
Ah, okay.
And then
Damn.
it tells you what type of plane that you're going to fly, the pictures of the plane, right? And that's when I started like getting into software as a service business, where you know bringing technology advancements into private aviation or business aviation. So that's
Yeah.
that's my thing. And I'm also the CEO of Flight Partner, which is a company that has all the data that you see, all the planes on the database.
Yep.
And I'm also doing airport operations down in San Diego at Palomar Airport, and also at Waco, Texas, with flight base operations, just
Okay.
arranging types of things. So yeah,
So
that's my thing.
so all this is leading to the fact that you just got recently named in Aviation Week's key business aviation executives to watch in 2024 list. That's an amazing accomplishment. Congrats on that.
It is. Thank you. I appreciate you recognizing that. That was a hard feat. I've done many publications, like throughout the past 2 years. I would say I started getting noticed by business aviation from MBAA, the National Business Aviation Association, Aviation Weekly, um, um, uh, Rob Report, like all these different publications would want to interview me about. It was unique because I was bringing technology to the industry and sustainability, but also they like my backstory. Like, oh, I came from the music industry. Here's a music producer now who turned into a pilot, who's now running his own private jet software as a service business. And
Yep.
I started, I it's another passion of mine. I mean, even though I wasn't passionate about it when my dad was trying to put me into it way back when.
Yeah.
But once I realized, that flying is really fun, and you do feel a different way when you're piloting your own aircraft. It's like driving a car and going up the coast. You feel free, right? But when you're in a plane, you just feel like there's nothing stopping you, and you have a different perspective when you're looking down 60,000 feet up, and you're in control of this vessel. And I've learned a lot along the way with aviation. I had to pay my dues, as you would say.
Hmm.
A person in color, there's not that many people in person of color that are senior executives or owners or CEOs of a private jet business. I can only count two or three on my hand that
Yeah.
are in that space. So for Aviation Week, which is the biggest publication on the planet for business aviation, to recognize me as a person to look out for in this year is a big accomplishment. I think it was a lot to do with my hard work, my persistence in achieving these goals, and being humble, like just trying to help others. And
Yep.
that's the biggest thing for
Absolutely.
me.
Absolutely. Stu, man, it was a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out to sit down and talk. If I could get you to do me one favor before we cut
Absolutely.
out, and that's give me a shout out.
Absolutely. Chad,
When it, yep,
I
Chad Kaiser, Conversations with Chad.
conversations with Chad Kaiser. I'd like everybody to know that this is Stuart Bullard, aka Stu-B-Doo, one of the founding producers of Aftermath over at Death Row, now a producer, facilitator, and developer. I want everybody to know that Chad Kaiser is one of the most amazing cats in this space. As far as the interview, I want to give everybody a shout out, and be sure to take a look out for Chad in the future. and be sure to look out for me in the future, and as far as in aviation and in music. You're the greatest, Chad. Take care of everything, and take care of this space.